I'm U.S. Senator Tom Cotton, and this is the elephant in the room.
Welcome to the Elephant in the Room. I'm your host, Cyrus Pearson.
I'm your co-host, Sophie Delkier.
Our guest today was U.S. Senator Tom Cotton from the great state of Arkansas. He's pretty funny.
He is. For someone who has accomplished so much, and who's just incredibly bright, of course, he is quite the humor.
Well, I put that out there first because I think the first thing you think of him is he's ambitious, he's hardworking, he's
Serious.
Accomplished, he was in the military, but man, he is low-key just funny sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of that comes through here. Let's get to the interview. Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas, thank you so much for taking the time to stop by the Elephant in the Room today.
Thank you for having me on. It's good to be with you.
This was, I would say, one of the hardest senators I've had to research because there is just,
so much.
Frankly, he's accomplished in so many ways. It's like taking information from here and here and here. And we have a lot of somewhat heavier subjects to get into, but let's start with something a little lighter that you may not normally hear from the senator.
So what we have here is, Senator Cotton, you had the amazing experience of growing up on a cattle farm. I love cattle. I love cows. I think they're cute and delicious. How was that? What was that like?
Well, you learn a lot of lessons when you're raising cattle. I'll say, because this came up in a Republican senator's lunch recently, that some people think cattle farm is an oxymoron. That, a farm is where you grow rice or soybeans or corn or wheat or what have you, and that a ranch is where you have livestock.
Yeah.
Actually, I found when I went away from the farm to college that I'd say farm. I grew up on a farm, and all these folks who'd never seen a farm thought I was, again, growing rice and beans and corn and so forth. So about 2 months into that, I started saying ranch, and then they thought I had 100,000 acres outside of Dallas with 20,000 head of cattle. So I had to settle on cattle farm as a term to kind of get across that it was a small family operation, but also that we were doing cattle, not crops. You do learn a lot of life lessons on the farm. I probably became my dad's chief farmhand when I was, 5 or 6. I remember having to kick hay bales out of the back of a truck that were probably bigger and weighed more than I did. But I think my mom, after having done it for 8 or 9 years of marriage with my father, was glad to get a replacement in me. And I did that throughout the rest of my time before I left for college. In a way, it's a much grander version of having a house pet. And, most people know what it's like to have a pet. You put your pet first. You spare no expense for it. You take care of it. You make sure that it's fed, and you make sure that it's okay. But, when you have a couple hundred head of cattle, you've got to do that all the time to make sure they're fed and make sure that they've got the medical care they need, that, as they're giving birth to calves, those calves are taken care of. And that can be, unpleasant work too. You've got to go out in the winter months and break ice in the pond or put out hay bales in the summer months when it's blazing hot. And again, you learn some important life lessons that probably are helpful in politics, but more generally helpful in life, to put people and other things ahead of yourself and stay focused on task at hand and overcome adverse conditions and so forth. So I didn't always like it when I was a kid growing up,
I'm sure,
but it's probably a good way to grow up.
Yeah. So would you say that's where your work ethic really came from?
So not just the farm. The farm was really an operation of my father and me. My mother and would on occasion help out, but again, I think she was happy to get a replacement for farmhand.
That's an early start. I think
yeah.
you there's a theme throughout your life where you're just ready to jump at things. I mean, 5 years old, my kid, and it's my fault. My wife keeps getting on me for it. She can't ride a bike yet.
Yeah,
and you're managing a farm.
Well, I would say I was pushed into it, not jumped into it at age 5. And then, there's not, again.
It didn't stunt your growth.
No, it didn't. But so it was really kind of it was a father and son operation. Again, my mother had been the chief farmhand before I came along, and she has been the chief farmhand since I left, which she probably wish I was around more. And then my mother and sister, tended to things at the household. Again, a lot of responsibility, and
Right.
especially, in the winter months when there's something to do almost every single day. It's just kind of a matter of course. You get out of school or get back from a practice, and then you got to go out to the farm. Some days
Right.
it might just be 30 minutes. Some days it might be 10 hours for the day.
I think we glossed over that. So do you find them delicious?
Yes, I very much enjoy hamburgers and steaks. And
Sophie, I thought you were going to start with.
Well, it's hard because they're cute, but they're also delicious. But
I thought you were going to start with.
Oh,
quickness. Go into it.
I
Let's
do
hear
have
this.
something else for you here, Senator. This was actually a recommended question from our good friend. I have this here, and what I really want to know is, are you still the quickest man in Congress?
I don't know. I think that's based on the. Is it a 3-mile run they do?
It
each
was.
spring?
3-mile course, yeah.
When I was first elected to the House, I had a small apartment down in Navy Yard, which is where that race is run. So I ran it the first 2 or 3 years I was in the Congress, but then I got a place out in Northern Virginia, so I haven't run it since. I think Mike Gallagher claims to have beaten me once or twice, but now that he's retired from Congress, maybe I've once again reclaimed my time. I still try to run each day. I don't run races as much as I used to. I got into running after the 9/11 attacks, before I got in the Army, to get prepared for the Army, and then over time, I stopped, but I kind of continued from running 5Ks and 10Ks into 10-miler, and then half marathon, and then marathon, and I probably ran, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 marathons.
Well, it's so impressive. And we need to brag a little bit. We have here, Cotton ran the Anacostia Park course in an impressive 17 minutes, 55 seconds. That's 3 miles. In 2013, sparking rumors among the Capitol Hill running community that he was rumored to be on pace to potentially break a longstanding race record, which I think was set in 1981. So
probably not, especially if that was set in if that was 2013. I've got another 11 years of wear and tear. And also too, one thing I realized in the Army, and it put me in good stead when I joined the Army, having trained for marathons, is rarely do you need feats of superhuman strength. Hollywood will often depict super soldiers as guys that look like The Rock and have a 48-inch chest and a 28-inch waist. And there's some of those in the Army as well. But some of the most elite special operators in, say, Delta Force, they might be 5'7" and look like marathoners. What you really need physically more than anything in the military is stamina and conditioning. And that's one reason. Like when I went to Ranger School, I didn't expect to go in at the time I did. I was actually had been training for 16 weeks for a marathon that was going to start 2 weeks later. So I went into Ranger School, which is one of the more demanding schools in the Army, at peak marathoning condition, and that helped me quite a bit. And I remember when I got back from Iraq, I was stationed across the river at Arlington National Cemetery, and I had a lot of soldiers there who had not deployed overseas because it's a job where they recruit straight out of basic training. So the junior enlisted had not yet deployed. All of the senior enlisted, the sergeants, and then all the officers usually deployed. And my soldiers complained that I didn't let them go to the weight room enough, that we ran too much. They wanted big beach and bar muscles for when they went over to the bars in Georgetown to meet Georgetown girls.
Oh, it's hilarious.
And one of my soldiers said, "Sir, you only think running is important because you're good at it." I said, "That's real close there, guy. It's actually the exact opposite, though. I'm good at it because I think it's important. Having been in Iraq now, I know that there are several times when we all had to run to keep from getting our asses shot off, but there's never a time when we got attacked by an armed bench press on the battlefield."
So for our listeners, what we were talking about is Senator Tom Cotton being named the fastest congressperson on the Hill. That
It's a low bar to step over, usually.
Well, and I'm just quickly, your time in 2014 was 18 minutes 29 seconds. A couple years later, you were 18 minutes and 35 seconds, and Representative Gallagher, you mentioned, finished in 2017 at 19 minutes and 46 seconds. So super quick.
I demand a recount on that one.
I'll have to get my fact check on 19.
I think he may have been using performance-enhancing drugs.
Probably.
Let's talk about this. You have there is just so much here. I'm not going to go. Let's get to this chronologically. Kind of. We're going to get to you at Arlington. We're going to get to you at combat overseas. You graduated. How do you pronounce this? Dardanelle High School.
That's good enough. Yeah.
And you went straight to Harvard, where you graduated magna cum laude in 3 years.
Yep.
Wow. And then that wasn't enough. Got a Juris Doctor from Harvard Law School. Wow. Okay. Was school just
Although
too easy
these
for
days,
you?
these days, given the infamy that Harvard has brought on itself, I try not to keep that. Try not to stress that. As some people say, what'd you do for all that time in Boston? Like I was in a state penitentiary for serious felonies. Might be less embarrassing than acknowledging I went to Harvard. Harvard's changed a lot since I was there.
Right. And you didn't buy into everything. I mean, you.
No, and I'd say so. One in the mid to late 1990s, a lot of the faculty there had been there for 30 or 40 years. So before most of the American universities had swung hard to the left. So sure, the student body was to the left and the faculty was on the whole, but we still had professors there like Harvey Mansfield, a Harvard institution, who is a political conservative, but also is a traditional scholar of great books, or Peter Berkowitz, who went on to be director of policy planning for Donald Trump at the State Department. Stanley Hoffman, Ed Banfield, these were all old titans. And some of them were political liberals or center-left Democrats, but they were traditionalists when it came to scholarship. So we had opportunities then that I think some students today lack because not many of those old school professors are still around. And then second, just the kind of the oppressive political correctness has year after year is kind of, I think, weighed down on students. So if you are center-right or especially openly conservative, I think you feel today like a beleaguered and oppressed minority on many campuses, whereas we knew we were in a minority as conservatives back then, but I wouldn't say we felt beleaguered at all. If anything, we kind of took glee and had fun in expressing our conservative opinions.
I know this is something we wanted to get into later, but since we're already on it, I mean, you know, I'm of the opinion that this shouldn't even really be a political issue. Things like free speech are just important. They're in the nature of our country and our Constitution. They're the fabric of who we are. Would you say a lot of what's happening, though, you know, really taking politics out of it, is it because of kind of the DEI that's been pushed on the universities, or is that just a small part of what's happening?
Well, I think in some cases it originates in the universities, and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, comes out of a lot of faddish academic theories that then become popularized and more widespread in the culture. But, you know, the idea that you need to have safe spaces against microaggressions and that, you know, words can be violence and so on and so forth. Some of the nonsense you hear in the media and in corporate America today, it all originates in the universities. And as more and more students kind of marinate in that and then come out and go into the workforce and expect the way they've been coddled by left-wing administrators and teachers to continue in the real world, they are either in for a rude awakening or they begin to change the culture for the worse at their institutions.
And not to mention, there are future lawyers and judges. I mean...
Yeah, it's like, you know, when there was a little Gaza encampment at Columbia University a few weeks ago, and Students Association. No, I think it was the Columbia Law Review. So these are presumably the best students on campus.
That's right.
And they demanded that finals be canceled because of the trauma to which they'd been exposed when the police came in to break up the little Gaza. I hope that I never have any of them representing me in a legal matter, because what are they going to do about the trauma of a judge overruling them or opposing counsel saying something mean about one of the stupid arguments they made in a brief?
Do you think DEI has had its moment and it's kind of on its way out, or what are your thoughts on that?
So at a superficial level, yes, you see fewer and fewer corporations trumpeting it in their annual stockholder reports or their shareholder meetings. You see some of the greatest champions of the DEI or the ESG, environmental, social, and governance investment movement, which is really just political activism dressed up as an investment philosophy, like Larry Fink of BlackRock, walking away from it. But it's too deeply entrenched in the culture and the intellectual mindset of the American left. So they'll start, you know, giving it different names or taking different tacks or trying to keep it less prominent. I don't think it's going to leave their institutions, though.
Where did this come from? I mean, I know that's such a loaded question, but where did this, you know, huge far left push towards these ideologies come from?
Well, again, a lot of it goes back to, you know, bad intellectual trends. Almost all bad trends in our culture start as bad intellectual trends, some as far back as, you know, the 17th and 18th century and European philosophy that then infiltrated our universities. You see that, you know, for instance, one of our worst presidents, Woodrow Wilson, who himself was a college professor, first president to openly criticize our Constitution, one of the only, because I think the American left realized that was not a way to win elections in America, but that, you know, influenced very heavily by German philosophy, which continued on and and it was developed throughout the 20th century, this focus on kind of identity politics, and that you can only understand something, as a man or as a woman, as someone who's black or white or Latino. There's no overarching truth. There's no fundamental human experience that transcends time and place and personal experiences. You see that very much in our Declaration of Independence, and that's the premise of America. But as that got rejected by subsequent thinkers and intellectuals, and then it became popularized in the universities and coming out of them. And that's really the root of the so-called DEI philosophy.
Right.
Is that you can't treat people as humans, as individuals, but rather only as a black man or a Latina woman or what have you. And that furthermore, that there are there's natural oppressor or oppressed classes, and again, not people with the fundamental human equality. And part of that is what you see happening with Israel and Gaza right now, is these toxic trends in American universities have been kind of superimposed on what's happened in Israel. And rather than seeing Hamas as a terrorist group that committed the worst atrocity against Jews since the Holocaust, that somehow Israel becomes the so-called oppressors, and that Hamas is the oppressed, or they're the colonized, and Israel is the colonizers, even though the Jews have had a homeland in Israel, for more than 3,000 years. So it all gets back to, again, bad intellectual and philosophical trends that ultimately start infecting our politics.
Let's jump around a bit just so we can fit everything in. Just a little more of your history. You've kind of touched on it. You served in the U.S. military, the Army from 2005 to 2009, then the reserves from 2010 to 2013. You did combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, serving in between those as a platoon leader of the Old Guard at Arlington National Cemetery, as we talked about. One thing I definitely wanted to ask you, I was really interested in this. A lot of us haven't served. We don't know what that's like. To go over there and be in some place where you're serving in combat, how does that change your perspective on life, the world, whatever it may be?
Well, for all your listeners who still have a chance to serve, based on their age and their life conditions, I would encourage them to. We're getting into the time of year when we get lots of high school and college groups coming through Washington, and I speak to them. And one point I always try to make is to encourage them to serve. And there's a lot of kids there that it's never crossed their mind. I mean, if you're part of a student group coming to Washington in the summer, there's almost by definition that you've got a leg up in life. Maybe you got a lot of leg ups. Maybe you're rich and you go to a great school and your parents are well connected. Maybe you just been a hardworking student in class and you've earned your way into that kind of program. But a lot of them think like, oh, I'm going to go to the right school, I'm going to get out, and I'm going to get a great job on a great corporate track. And I always tell them, like, look, there's nothing you can do better, not just for your country, but for yourself, than serving our nation in uniform. Yeah, it'll give you lots of good experiences and skills. Some of those will be concrete, transferable skills, like, say, if you become a pilot or you become, a medic or what have you. But even if you're in something like I was, the infantry, in which there are not a lot of direct transferable skills from the infantry into the civilian world. There's not. You don't knock down a bunker and clear a trench line, when you're living in Rogers, Arkansas. It still gives you whatever you do in the military, you get intangible skills as well, leadership, discipline, mission focus, teamwork, as well as the respect of your fellow citizens, almost more so than any other thing you could do. And then finally, you'll always have that, putting aside those practical considerations, you'll always have that time in your life to look back fondly on the service you rendered your nation and the friendships you developed with your battle buddies and comrades in arms. So if you still have a chance to serve in our nation's military, I encourage you to think seriously about it. And obviously, those things are amplified when you're in a time of war, which we were, and almost everybody who served in those days, was experienced in Iraq or Afghanistan. It's our job now in the Senate and as national leaders to try to deprive our troops from that experience as well. It's when you're the dispatched, you want your shot at the title, but when you're the dispatcher, you see things differently. And what we need is peace and stability, and it's our job to make sure that all those young men and women who are in the nation's uniform are there as an instrument of national power to preserve peace and stability, not to have to win our wars, but to stop them from happening in the first place. But failing that, if there is a war and you are in combat, then obviously it amplifies all those lessons very intensely. And you put 22-year-olds or 18-year-olds out on the front lines where their lives are at stake and they're battle buddies' lives are at stake, and the lives of civilians on the battlefield are at stake. And it's a searing experience that few people will ever put behind them, and that will, something that almost no one else can share with them.
Yeah.
Do you think it's affected the way that you parent? I think you have 2 sons. Is that right?
I do, yes.
So my stepfather was also in combat, and he was in Iraq. And my little stepbrother, he's not risk adverse with his son at all. And I think it's because of his combat days. Are you more risk adverse with your sons, or how does it affect the way that you parent them?
No, I guess I'm not really risk averse. No, I think it's important for kids, especially boys, to be outside, to play, to take risks, to climb trees, to try to cross logs over creeks, and to get, play sports and get in fights.
Yeah.
I think part of the wrong turn we've taken in raising kids is that they spend too much time inside and on screens, whether it's video games or devices and things like that, and they're not developing all the things that we developed, from time immemorial by being able playing with kids in the real world outside in somewhat dangerous settings. I mean, like reasonably dangerous, not like playing playing in traffic on the highway.
He's describing me, actually. I only recently started to open up and say there needs to be some element of being able to hurt yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm letting the kids go outside, and I feel better about it.
Yeah, and if kids, to get back to our talk about university, if kids live a cloistered existence, if they're usually inside, they're usually protected by their parents. If the parents don't let them ride bikes around the neighborhood, don't let them climb a tree, or maybe engage in unsupervised play with their friends, again, they expect to be protected and cosseted throughout life, and they get to college campuses and they expect that to continue, and then they get out of campus and they expect that to continue as well. I'm not sure that being in the Army was necessary for that, though. I mean, that's the kind of upbringing I had on a farm that my father exposed me to, and my mother. So I think my wife and I probably, would have believed that regardless. Now, my son, sometimes it affects the way my sons see me. Like if we're at a ball game, for instance, and it's colder than expected, and my son, complains that he's cold, and I say, "Well, I'm cold too," and he says, "Well, you were in the Army, you're used to it."
Give me that
cute.
jacket.
Yeah.
Memorial Day is coming up. It's going to be surprising to many people. It's actually my dad's favorite holiday. We would always spend it. We never went to the beach or anything. We'd always go over to Arlington National Cemetery. We've got about 5 family members buried there in another cemetery near here. We mentioned you were stationed at Arlington National Cemetery in the Old Guard. Can you describe to people who may not know what that is?
Mm-hmm.
The Old Guard is the nation's oldest infantry regiment. It goes back to the time of George Washington, and it's for now going on almost 80 years. It's been the nation's ceremonial unit as well. So it performs military honors funerals every day, except for federal holidays and weekends in Arlington National Cemetery. And it conducts ceremonies in and around the national capital. So the most prominent ones being, of course, the inauguration or a state funeral or a arrival ceremony for a foreign head of state at the White House, but dozens of other smaller events each week in the nation's capital. Typically, it's a job you do at least as an officer, as your second job, your second go-around, once you've done a job once and done at least a tolerably passable job at it. So I was in Iraq with the 101st Airborne as a platoon leader, and I got orders to go to the Old Guard. Typically, you apply to the Old Guard. It's like the Ranger Regiment or Special Forces. You only apply to it and have to be admitted. The Army was very taxed in those days with manpower, and in the cemetery in particular, it was taxed. And unlike most units in the Army, where senior non-commissioned officers, sergeant first class or a first sergeant, can cover down and do the job in the absence of an officer, because of the ceremonial requirements of the Old Guard. They have to have an officer there to do the work. So I was voluntold. I didn't volunteer to go to the Old Guard, but it's a great assignment. I mean, if you'd asked me where I'd go, it would have been one of my top 2 or 3 choices. And it's certainly a solemn duty to be there in the cemetery and performing funerals for our fallen heroes or veterans who have passed away, but wanted to be buried in the cemetery because their service was so consequential for them and their family. And again, as I had a regimental commander there used to say, it's not the most important unit in our Army, far from it. But if you were to start the Army from scratch, you'd have to create the Old Guard on day one because it's a symbol of our commitment to our warriors that we'll never leave them behind, and we'll always care for them, and we'll always care for their family in the same kind of way that Memorial Day is as well.
You actually wrote a book on this?
Sacred Duty, available at bookstores and online near you, so you can go out and buy it now.
I love it.
Yeah, if you want a confidence boost, it actually has great ratings. So just go ahead and read that. Try not to get too big ahead. Are you a perfectionist?
Well, I always try to do the very best I can on every single
Okay.
job. I don't think anyone ever achieves perfection. Even at
That's
the
what a
old guard, even at the old
perfectionist would
guard,
say.
even at the old guard. Our standard was perfection because it was a high stakes for us. I mean, one thing you learn when you're at the old guard, things that are rare or even once in a lifetime experiences for most people is someone's job, and they do it every single day. And that was certainly the case for us. Very few people are going to have experienced more than one military honors funeral in Arlington for a loved one, and that's usually that family's last experience with the Army, especially if, as it was in those days, someone who'd been killed in action. And in most cases, that meant you had grieving parents, oftentimes younger parents. In many cases, you had a grieving widow, and even young children. So that was their last experience with the Army, and after that, they would be working with the Department of Veterans Affairs. So we took great pride in trying to achieve a standard of perfection in every single funeral, even though for us, we might do 6 or even 8 funerals in a day. Well, I guess 6 was the maximum funerals in a day. And therefore, you might do 20 to 25 in a week. We always remember that for the people sitting in those chairs, this is the one time they're going to see that. And we took great pride in that. Again, after every funeral, we'd always conduct an after-action review to identify what was the, hopefully, few small mistakes you made, not the big mistakes. But, it's kind of the mindset that Joe DiMaggio famously had. Someone asked him why he always, ran out ground balls and pop flies, didn't take it easy over a 154-game season. He said there might be someone sitting in the stands who's going to see me for the first and only time in their life, and they deserve to see the very best.
Sounds like an honor.
Yeah.
Truly.
Yeah, no, that is great. Does that involve the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier at all?
So I didn't personally serve at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. In those days, that was one of the few places in which the Old Guard didn't need an officer, because typically the soldiers you see guarding the Tomb of the Unknowns are junior enlisted. Some of them have only been in the Army for 18 months or less.
Wow.
And usually they don't stay there for more than a couple years. So in many cases, they haven't even been promoted to E5 sergeant. They typically will have 2 or maybe 3 sergeants over them, the sergeant of the guard. In recent years, again, I think because of the manpower concerns haven't been as severe at the Old Guard, they have had an officer there, the so-called commander of the guard, but it's more of an administrative position to be the officer. You're not on the regular duty roster of those young enlisted who are guarding the tomb 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So as a platoon leader in one of the line companies, our main responsibility was military honor funerals. When we weren't doing those, we would be part of ceremonies, and occasionally that would include ceremonies at the Tomb of the Unknown. So if you see, when the president, for instance, lays a wreath on Memorial Day or Veterans Day, they have small platoons from each of the services there, and sometimes that would include us.
How do you celebrate Memorial Day? It seems like you should be on a stage being celebrated. What do you do?
Well, no, not me, because I survived. So,
well, yes,
Veterans Day. Veterans Day is when we honor everyone else.
That is the difference. Yes.
Memorial Day. I mean, I wouldn't even think of it necessarily as celebrating Memorial Day as trying to remember why we have Memorial Day. I understand that it's the unofficial kickoff of summer, and lots of people are going to go to the beach or go to the lake and have a cookout, and that's great and that's fine. And even those young men and women who gave their lives in defense of this nation would say, I think, if you were able to ask them, we want you to enjoy the unofficial kickoff of summer. We want you to go to the beach or go to the lake and celebrate with your family. That's one of the reasons that we fought, is so you and your family had the opportunity and the freedom to enjoy this moment. We would only ask that you take the time to remember the sacrifice of all of our fallen heroes, and maybe most importantly, talk to your children about why we have Memorial Day and what we're remembering on Memorial Day, and that those fallen heroes are the reason why you get to go play in a baseball tournament, or why you get to go to the beach, or why you go to the lake.
Right.
Okay, listeners, there's your action plan. If you're at the beach, the river, the baseball game, or the mountains, take a moment and remember Memorial Day and why you have the ability to do it.
It's true. I think a lot of people forget.
We are wrapping up in time, so any last question? Unfortunately, we're almost out of time.
We heard what you like to do on Memorial Day and why it's important to you. Best Father's Day gift you've ever gotten?
Can I use the old joke that all I want for Father's Day is the right to play golf on Mother's Day? No, I don't.
Same thing.
I don't play golf anymore. Oh no, I mean it's funny. My kids are young enough that they still don't really recognize Mother's Day or Father's Day as a
Right.
relaxing day for mom or for dad. But just to get cards from them and have time to spend with them and spend with my wife and their mom is a great opportunity. Maybe when they get a little bit older, they'll have better ideas for gifts. But right now, the gift we have is the time we have with them, which especially when they're young like this, isn't much time. They get old fast. So we always just usually enjoy the day together.
Just remember that if they give you a rock, it's not a rock, it's a paperweight.
Yeah, exactly.
Senator, thanks. Don't mean to keep you too long. Thanks for being the guest on today's The Elephant in the Room, and thank you so much for your service.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you both.
for
It's
your
good to be on
service.
with you.
Thank you.
Sophie, you felt you absolutely had to clear something up when it came to breaking the record about fastest member of Congress.
Well, I was so embarrassed. I was starting to question myself. Where am I pulling this 1981 number out?
Okay.
But it turns out that I was reading. This was the record for the Senate. So
Okay.
of course, fastest people in Congress. You have House Representatives. You have Senate.
That's Congress.
I was reading the senators only record.
Okay, all right.
So.
Now, do you feel validated? You feel cleared? The air has been cleared?
Well, I was just I was second guessing myself. So, anyways.
It's hard. As Senator Cotton would say, perfection is something you can strive for. But, yeah, I mean, are we really going to achieve that? We didn't today. The Elephant in the Room. If you liked it, please like, subscribe. Just hit that little plus button. And then when a new episode comes out, it just pops up on your phone. And you can decide whether to listen to it or not.
Which you
right?
should.
Yeah, absolutely. The Elephant in the Room is brought to you under the direction of U.S. Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming. Executive producer is Arjun Modi. Show producer is Carly Rapp. Technical director is Rashad Smith. Thanks for listening. And until next time, this has been The Elephant in the Room.